At 7:12 on a Wednesday morning, frost still clung to the roof of Hale Auto and Diesel. Claire Bennett crossed the gravel lot with a clipboard and a signed acquisition memo. She saw no for sale sign, only a painted board, Hale Auto and Diesel Est, 1,968, and a man wiping his hands on a shop rag. She told him the purchase had closed last Thursday. He said, "Ma'am, I don't know who sold you this land, but it wasn't mine to sell, and it sure as hell wasn't hers." She looked down at the contract. Seller line, Vanessa Hale. The name on the door behind him, Daniel Hale. Claire sat in the rental SUV for 22 minutes before she called Denver. She kept the engine off. Through the windshield, she watched Daniel Hale walk back into the garage bay and crouch beside a 1998 F-250, resuming whatever he had been doing before she arrived. He did not look back at her. He did not call anyone. He just kept working, as though the complication she represented was small and would either sort itself or it wouldn't. She told the legal team she needed a full chain of title on the Bozeman parcel. Within the hour, 3 weeks earlier, she had been in a conference room in Denver. Marcus Voss had set a folder on the table in front of her, already tabbed and initialed, and said, "Clean deal, Claire, seller motivated. We move fast." She had signed the acquisition memo without asking about the seller's name. That was not unusual. She handled 100 transactions a year. She did not read every deed before she greenlit due diligence. Now she wished she had. The chain of title arrived at 40 minutes past 10. She read it on her phone, then opened her laptop and read it again. The seller of record was Vanessa Hale. Execution date 6 weeks prior. Notarized in Helena, not Bozeman. Helena, 160 miles north. The sale price was $180,000, conveyed to a limited liability company called Crestline Holdings. She pulled Crestline in the company's internal registry. 3 shell layers, Delaware Incorporation. The final layer resolved to an entity controlled by a holding group linked to Marcus Voss. She closed the laptop and sat there for a while. She thought about the acquisition memo she had signed in Denver, the way Marcus had placed the folder in front of her, already tabbed and initialed, already solved. She had not asked the name of the seller. She handled 100 transactions a year, and sellers were abstractions motivated or reluctant, disclosed or not. She had not asked, and Marcus had not offered, and that gap between them was where a fraud had quietly installed itself. At 11 o'clock she got out of the SUV and walked back into the garage. She was not carrying the clipboard this time. She asked Daniel Hale if he knew the name Crestline Holdings. He straightened up from under the truck hood, looked at her, and shook his head once, slowly, the way a person does when they're not surprised, just tired. He wiped his hands again and said she could come in back. The rear office was small. A wooden desk, a calendar from 2024 still on the wall, never flipped, a shelf with 3 automotive manuals, and a framed photograph of a young woman with red hair and a newborn bundled against her chest. Daniel opened a file drawer and produced a manila folder, thin, worn at the corners. Inside was a photocopied document. Hale Family Trust, established 1968, Gallatin County, Montana. He had one passage circled in pencil. She read it. No spouse, by marriage or divorce, shall hold transferable interest in trust corpus. The silence lasted long enough for him to pour coffee from a machine on the counter and set a mug in front of her without being asked. She looked up. How long was she your wife before she signed this? He sat down across from her. 11 years. She never asked to see it. Claire drove back to the Element Hotel in downtown Bozeman at noon. She did not call the company's general counsel. She called Helen Ortiz, who had been her roommate at Wharton, and was now a real estate attorney in Chicago. She kept the call brief. She read Helen the trust language from a photo she had taken with her phone. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would call back in an hour. The next morning, Claire returned to the garage on the pretext of supplemental due diligence. She told herself it was a reasonable cover. Daniel Hale was underneath a Tacoma when she arrived, only his legs visible, one boot propped against the frame rail. She sat on an oil drum near the bay entrance and waited. She had been there perhaps 20 minutes when a dark gray Audi Q7 pulled into the lot. A man in his 60s stepped out wearing a navy blazer over a collared shirt. His hair was white and trimmed close. He walked directly to the garage without looking at Claire. leaned down, and addressed the pair of legs beneath the Tacoma. "Dr. Hale," the man said, "I have the renewal for you to look at." Daniel rolled out from under the truck. He stood, took the envelope the man held out, and set it unopened on the workbench. The man nodded, said he hoped Daniel would consider it this time, and walked back to the Audi. He did not acknowledge Claire. In 30 seconds the car was gone. She asked. Daniel took a rag off the bench and worked it between his fingers. He said he had gone to Stanford for civil engineering, undergrad, 2003 to 2007, then MIT for a master's in structural engineering, 2007 to 2009. He had worked for a firm called Hayworth Renton in Seattle for 7 years, designed long-span bridge systems. He had 2 patents, both for post-tensioned concrete configurations used in ocean crossings. Claire looked at him. He said it the way you might read facts off an old insurance form. No pride, no grief, just data that had once been a life and was now a record. The envelope was a consulting contract. The man came out every 3 months, same firm, same offer, updated number each time. Daniel declined every 3 months. He did not explain this. He did not seem to think it required explanation. Claire looked around the garage. The tools hung in precise order on the pegboard. The invoice forms and the wire rack were in 2 stacks, sorted by date. The tire pressure gauges on the shelf were arranged smallest to largest. She had thought it was habit. Now she understood it was something else. She said, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" He set the rag down. "Tell who? My ex-wife? She wouldn't have stayed for it. She left for it." Claire did not ask what that meant. She already understood it. Vanessa Hale had not left because Daniel was poor. She had left because he had chosen to look poor, and that choice had been entirely his, and she had never been able to forgive him for it. At 2:45 that afternoon, the side door opened, and a 9-year-old boy in a backpack came through it. He saw Claire and stopped. He said, "Hi, ma'am," in a careful voice, and then went directly into the back office. Daniel walked past her without a word, reached into a paper bag on the counter, and placed 4 apple slices on the desk in front of the boy. He did not break stride. He did not look at the boy to check whether the boy was looking at him. Claire turned toward the bay door and studied the parking lot. She was walking to her car when her phone rang. Marcus Voss. She looked at the screen for 2 full rings, then answered. "You still in Bozeman?" he said. "Sign the closing. Come home." She told him she needed another day. He said there was nothing to review. She said goodnight and hung up. Helen called back at 9 that evening. Claire was sitting on the bed in her room at the Element, the chain of title printed on hotel paper in 3 pages on the comforter beside her. Helen said, "If that trust language holds, your company bought stolen property. Not disputed property. Stolen. You signed the closing memo, you're personally liable. Not the company, you." Claire thanked her and asked her to stay available. She did not sleep well. In the morning she caught the 6:40 flight to Denver International and was in the Bennett Vance office by 9:15. She found Marcus in the hall outside the conference room and asked him directly about Crestline Holdings. He smiled the way he always smiled when something was being treated as a problem that he had already filed away as solved. He said she was tired. He said Montana did that to people. He said the seller signed, the notary stamped, and they would close on Friday. She brought up the spousal exclusion. His face changed for a moment, just a moment. Then he said it was a family matter, not theirs. In the meeting afterward, reviewing the acquisition file with 2 of the firm's senior partners, she understood that both of them had known about Crestline from the beginning. She was the only signatory who had not. She had been chosen for the memo precisely because her name was clean. She left the conference room at 11 and did not speak to anyone on the way out. The return flight landed in Bozeman at dusk. She stood outside the terminal for 6 minutes on the sidewalk. The Bridger Range to the east was dark under low cloud, only the faintest outline visible. The kind of presence you felt more than saw. The air was cold and carried something mineral and clean that Denver's Front Range never quite managed. A shuttle driver asked if she needed the hotel zone. She shook her head. She waited until she was ready, and then she got a cab. The garage was dark. She drove past it and continued another mile to a small ranch house set back from the road with 2 cottonwood trees in the front yard. The porch light was on. She knocked. Daniel opened the door. He was not surprised to see her. He stepped back and let her in without asking why she had come. Eli was already in bed. They sat at the kitchen table. She told him she had come to Bozeman to accelerate a transaction and that she was now trying to find a way to stop it. He asked if she was sure about that. She said she was not. She said, "But I know what signing the wrong thing feels like. I did it once before in my marriage." He did not ask about the marriage. He got up and filled a glass of water from the tap and set it in front of her. When she left 20 minutes later, she placed Helen Ortiz's business card on the table beside the salt shaker. Daniel was still at the table when the sound of her car faded down the road. He picked up the card and looked at it for a long time. That night, 200 miles north, a phone on Vanessa Hale's kitchen counter lit up with a message from a number she did not recognize. One line, "Crestline is going to burn. Get out." She read it twice, then set the phone face down. Saturday was different. The garage was not officially open, but the bay doors were rolled up halfway because the weather was holding, and Daniel preferred the light. Claire arrived just after 9 carrying a white pastry box from Wild Crumb on East Main. She did not offer an explanation. She set it on the counter near the coffee machine and opened the lid. Eli was on a shop stool near the wall, a sketchbook on his knees, working on something with a pencil. Daniel was on his back under the workbench rehanging a bottom hinge that had pulled loose from the frame. She poured herself coffee from the machine and sat in the chair near the door. For a while no one spoke. She picked up a copy of the Bozeman Daily Chronicle that was folded on the seat beside her and read about a water rights dispute in the Gallatin Valley and a proposal to widen the interchange at North 19th. Daniel worked. Eli worked. The mountains were visible through the open bay doors, pale and enormous above the tree line. "Do you know how many plates a stegosaurus had?" Eli said. Claire looked up from the paper. "On its back?" "Yeah." She thought about it. 17? Between 17 and 22. Scientists are still figuring it out. He turned the sketchbook to show her. The stegosaurus was large and slightly lopsided, with careful detail on each individual dorsal plate. They used to think they were for protection. Now they think they were for temperature. "Smarter than armor," Claire said. He considered that, and wrote something small at the bottom of the page. Daniel came out from under the workbench, assessed the hinge, decided it was right, and stood. He looked at Eli and then at Claire and said they could walk out back if she wanted to see the property, not the survey map version, the actual ground. They went out through the rear door and across a narrow service apron to where the lot opened up into 6 acres of mixed grass and scrub pine sloping gently toward a creek that was running clear over dark stone. The cottonwoods along the bank were already beginning to turn, early yellow at the tips. Daniel stopped near a large ponderosa at the crown of the slope. He said his father had taught him to drive out here when he was 9 years old. A 1964 pickup, 3 on the tree. He pointed to a cluster of 3 aspens near the creek and said his father had named them after his 3 sisters. Sarah used to bring Eli out here in the evenings before the boy could walk, just laid him in the grass and let him watch the sky. Claire looked at the aspens. She looked at the creek. She understood then, in a way no document had made clear, why a man with 2 engineering patents was rehanging hinges in a garage in Bozeman and why he had declined $42 million for this exact parcel 2 years prior. You could not quantify what this ground was. Eli had run ahead to the creek and was crouching at the water's edge, turning stones. Daniel and Claire stood 4 paces apart. Neither of them looked at the other. He said, "If I lose it, I lose it. I lived without money before." She said, "You're not going to lose it." He did not thank her. She did not say anything further. On the walk back to the parking lot, her phone rang. A Bozeman number she did not know. She answered. An older man's voice, careful and deliberate, identified himself as Walter Briggs. He said he had heard from a friend at the county that someone had been asking about the Hale family trust. He said he would like to talk, but not on the phone. Vanessa arrived on Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon without calling ahead. She drove down from Billings in a charcoal Jeep Grand Cherokee and parked at an angle in the lot as though she intended to leave quickly. Eli was in school. Claire was inside the rear office with Daniel, a yellow highlighter in her hand, and a copy of the 1968 trust open on the desk between them. Vanessa came through the side door and stopped. She took in the office. She took in Claire. She took in the highlighted document on the desk. She said nothing for a moment, and then she said quite a lot. The first part of it was directed at Claire, something about vultures, about timing, about women who showed up after the damage was done and called it help. The second part was directed at Daniel. You let this place rot for years. You turned down every offer anyone ever made you. And now you're playing victim with the woman who bought it? Daniel did not respond. He leaned against the file cabinet with his arms at his sides and let her finish. It took 3 minutes. When she stopped, he said, "Did Marcus tell you what Crestline was? Or did you just sign because he asked?" The air in the room shifted. Vanessa's posture changed, small but visible, a tightening across the shoulders. She did not answer. Claire stood, said she would wait outside, and went out to the parking lot. She stood near her rental car and looked at the front of the building. The painted sign above the bays, 1968, 56 years of one family's name on one piece of ground. She had been in real estate long enough to know that most properties meant nothing to the people who sold them. Numbers, comps, comparable land use categories in a county database. This one was different, and she had known it since the Saturday she stood on the slope and looked at 3 aspens named after women who were gone. She felt, for the first time, that she had stepped into something that did not belong to her, not the property. The grief underneath it. Inside, Daniel placed the trust document, open, in front of Vanessa. He set it so the circled passage was at the top and pointed to it once with one finger and stepped back. She read it. He watched her read it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You let me sign it." He said, "You signed without reading it. That's not the same thing." She read the passage a second time. He did not speak again. The document lay between them, stating plainly what 11 years of marriage had not. She took her purse from the chair. She set the trust paper on the desk corner, squared to the edge. She walked out through the side door without slamming it. Claire heard the Jeep start and watched it back out of the lot and turn north, not toward Helena but the opposite direction, toward Billings. Claire was still standing in the lot when Daniel came out a few minutes later. He looked at the direction the Jeep had gone. She looked at it too. Neither of them said anything about where Vanessa was heading. That evening, Walter Briggs was waiting at the small bar adjacent to the Element lobby. He was a thin man of 71, with large hands and the careful, deliberate movement of someone managing a body that required management. He had a glass of beer in front of him that he had not touched. He had a manila envelope on the table that was thick enough to have significant weight. He did not begin with the envelope. He began with 1968. He had been 13 that summer, he said. His mother cleaned houses in the valley, and he had gotten himself a seasonal job as a filing assistant at the Gallatin County Recorder's office. Mostly he made copies and carried folders. One morning in July, a man named Thomas Hale came in to register a family trust. The recorder on duty was busy. Walter was the one who sat down with Thomas Hale and typed the document from handwritten notes. He said Thomas Hale was a deliberate man. He had wanted every clause precise. Walter opened the manila envelope. Inside was the original 1968 document, cream-colored paper gone brittle at the edges, bearing the typescript of an old office machine and the signature of Thomas Hale in blue ink. Clipped behind it was a 3x5 index card, the kind used for recipe files. The handwriting on it was not Thomas Hale's, it was the county recorder's. A notation made at the time of registration. Claire read it. Trust corpus includes mineral and water rights subsurface section 14. Never to be severed from surface deed. She set the card down. Walter said the card had never been scanned. When the county converted to digital records in 2003, someone had pulled the file and processed the pages, but the card had been loose inside the back cover. It was not included. Whether that was error or intent, he could not say for certain. He had taken the original home that day in 2003 when he retired the physical files. He said he'd had a feeling about it. He said he'd had feelings about a lot of things over the years, and most of them had turned out to be right. Claire understood the full design then. Marcus Voss had known about the index card. His people had accessed the original county archives before he approached Vanessa. The scheme was not simply to buy a disputed property cheap and flip it. It was to sever the surface rights from the mineral and water rights, sell Bennett Vance a parcel with severed surface value, and file the mineral claim separately through a second Delaware entity. The surface land without the subsurface rights was worth perhaps 30% of the combined appraisal. The subsurface, with the water clause and the railroad easement, was where the real value lived. Marcus had intended to own both, one through Vanessa and one through an LLC no one would connect to him, and he had intended Bennett Vance and Claire's signature to legitimize the transaction. Walter folded his hands on the table. He said, "I'm 71, ma'am. I've got a grandson about Eli's age. I knew Thomas Hale. I should have come forward when his boy's wife filed those papers. I didn't. I'm coming forward now." He looked at the untouched glass of beer. He pushed it a few inches to the side, as though making room for whatever came next. Claire thanked him. She shook his hand. She walked out of the hotel bar and across the lobby and out to the parking lot and sat in her car. She did not drive for 14 minutes. She cried for most of them. It was the first time she had cried since her divorce, 3 years prior. She was not entirely sure what she was crying about. She thought it might be Thomas Hale's index card. She thought it might be something else. At 5 the next morning, she was on the first flight out of BZN. She had not called Daniel. On the highway to the airport, she passed the elementary school where Eli went each day. The classroom lights were already on inside. She did not stop. The Bennett Vance board convened on Sunday at 10 in the morning, Denver time, in the firm's conference room on the 22nd floor. 6 board members were present. 2 senior partners sat along the wall. Marcus Voss joined by video link from Billings, his background a gray hotel room. Linda Vance, 68, co-founder and board chair, sat at the head of the table with a yellow legal pad and a pen. Claire stood at the far end and presented for 22 minutes without notes. She walked through the Hale Family Trust document from 1968, the spousal exclusion language, and the reason Vanessa Hale had held no transferable interest in the parcel. She presented the Crestline Holdings shell structure, 3 layers, Delaware, resolution to a Voss-controlled entity. She showed the notarization location discrepancy, Helena, not Bozeman, a distance of 160 miles from the property. She displayed the scanned image of Walter Briggs's index card and explained its legal weight. If the mineral and water rights were inseverable from the surface deed, then any claim Marcus had filed on the subsurface independently was fraudulent on its face. She did not raise her voice. She did not editorialize. She laid the documents flat on the table, one by one, and let them be what they were. Marcus, on the video screen, said, "Claire has developed a personal entanglement with the ex-husband of the seller. Her judgment in this matter is clearly compromised. I move the board to remove her from any decision-making role on the Bozeman acquisition and to proceed with closing." Claire said, "I had dinner at his kitchen table one time. I drank water. He has a 9-year-old son. If that's an entanglement, I'll wear it." Linda Vance asked to see the index card. Helen Ortiz had faxed a notarized scan to the firm at 8 that morning. Linda picked up the copy from the table and read it. She set it down. She looked at Marcus on the screen for 10 seconds without speaking. Then she said, "Marcus, you're going to step down from the joint venture by close of business Monday. Your equity stake in Crestline will be unwound at cost. If you contest this, we file a referral with the SEC ourselves." Marcus said she did not have the authority. Linda said, "I built this firm on parcels nobody else would touch. I'm not going to lose it to a man who couldn't be bothered to read a family trust." The vote was 5-1. Marcus's screen went dark before the tally was complete. After the room cleared, Linda stayed behind. She waited for Claire to pick up the documents from the table, and then she said, "You did the right thing. It's going to cost us $18 million in write-downs, and probably the Denver fund pulling out entirely. I want you to know I understood that when I raised my hand." Claire flew back to Bozeman that evening on the 6:50 out of Denver. She did not text Daniel. She took a cab from the airport and had the driver stop at the garage. The building was dark except for the light in the rear office. She could see it through the side window. She knocked. Daniel had been locking up when he heard it. He came through the side door and looked at her. She said, "It's over. The deal is unwound. You keep everything." He stood with one hand on the doorframe. He did not thank her. He did not reach for her. He looked at her for a moment and then he said, "You should eat something." Eli left half a sandwich. It was the first time she had smiled in 4 days. She didn't know until it was already there. Monday morning, Vanessa drove to the apartment Marcus kept in Billings. She had read the spousal exclusion twice on Sunday night, then read it a 3rd time in the morning. She had understood what it meant on the first read. She had spent the rest of the night understanding what it meant about Marcus. She was not surprised when she arrived that he was already dressed and drinking coffee, already managing his morning as though nothing was in motion. She set a manila folder on the kitchen counter without saying anything. Inside it was a sequence of text messages between Marcus and an LLC attorney in Wilmington, spanning 6 months. She had been collecting them since October, forwarded copies from a phone he had stopped thinking she had access to. She had delivered the original thread to Helen Ortiz the evening before. Marcus looked at the folder. Then he looked at her. He told her she was making a mistake. Then he told her what would happen to her if she pursued it. He described it in careful terms, almost politely, the way he described most things he intended to happen. Vanessa picked up her apartment key from the counter and placed it beside the folder. She walked out. She did not go to Daniel. She was not entitled to that, and she knew it. She stopped at a pharmacy on the way out of Billings and bought a note card. She wrote, "I'm sorry I didn't read what your grandfather wrote. I'm sorry for what I sold." She did not sign it with love. She signed it with her name. She drove to Bozeman and placed it in the mailbox on the side of the garage. Then she got back in the Jeep and drove north. Daniel found the card in the afternoon. He read it twice and brought it inside. He set it on the kitchen table and waited until Eli came home from school, then slid it across to him without explanation. Eli read it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Is Mom okay?" Daniel said, "She's figuring it out." "That's something." The boy accepted that and went to start his homework. That night, Daniel sat on the front porch steps in his flannel shirt and no jacket. The temperature had dropped into the 40s. He was not quite cold enough to go inside. He heard footsteps on the gravel path at 9:15 and looked up. Claire came out of the dark and sat down on the step beside him, leaving a gap between them. She had walked from the element, 2 miles in the dark, and she was breathing slightly harder than normal. She did not explain why she had walked instead of driving. They sat there. The fog was coming off the creek at the edge of the property. A dog barked twice somewhere down the road and then stopped. 8 minutes passed in which neither of them spoke. Daniel reached back, shrugged out of the outer flannel shirt, and laid it over Claire's shoulders. She did not move. She did not pull it tighter or thank him. She sat with it draped across her and looked at the dark ground. The front door opened. Eli stood in the rectangle of kitchen light. He looked at his father. He looked at Claire. He pulled the door shut again, gently, all the way. From inside the house, out of sight, he went to brush his teeth and wash his face. Later, Daniel looked at the shelf above the fireplace, at the photograph of Sarah taken the autumn she got sick, before anyone knew. He said, "She'd like you. She'd have asked you 100 questions." Claire looked at the photograph for a moment. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He had not set it to receive an answer. 2 weeks later, Daniel sat in a chair across from Helen Ortiz in her Chicago office. She had cleared the morning for him. The desk between them held a bound appraisal from an independent valuation firm, 42 pages, tabbed in 3 places. The cover summary listed the parcel: 6 acres, surface rights, mineral rights, water rights, railroad easement, Gallatin County, Montana. Total assessed value, $94.3 million. Daniel looked at the number. He sat with it the way he might sit with a diagnosis, not arguing, not relieved, just absorbing its weight. Helen gave him a moment. She poured water from a carafe on the credenza and slid a glass across the desk. She told him there was a legitimate offer on the table from a Denver-based infrastructure fund. No connection to Voss or his entities. She had confirmed that herself. They had reviewed the parcel independently and wanted the full 6 acres. They were prepared to close in 60 days. Daniel looked out the window. The Chicago skyline was gray and tall and had nothing to do with him. He looked back at the appraisal. He said, "I'd like to keep the garage open. The rest sell 3 acres at the back, the flat section near the road, if the price is right. Put the slope and the creek and the trees into a new trust for Eli. Same language as my father's." Helen made a note. She asked, "And the spousal exclusion clause?" He said, "Leave it in. He'll thank me one day." She smiled and kept writing. Outside her window, 22 floors down, Chicago moved at its usual pace, indifferent to the fact that a man had just decided the shape of his son's future in 4 sentences. Across town that morning, on the digital edition of the Bozeman Daily Chronicle, a small article appeared in the business section. Voss steps down, amid federal inquiry, 14 paragraphs. dry and procedural, the kind of language that contained enormous consequences inside very quiet sentences. It described an SEC investigation into potential mineral rights fraud in connection with a Gallatin County property transaction. It named several associated entities. It did not name Daniel Hale. In Helena, in a small firm on the second floor of a building on Last Chance Gulch, Vanessa Hale signed 2 documents that afternoon. One was a civil agreement with Daniel's attorney, no financial component, stipulating only that she would not seek to complicate his sole custody arrangement. The other was an employment contract. She had been hired as a junior accountant. The firm was small and unhurried. She started Monday. She did not ask for more than that. Back in Bozeman, on a Tuesday afternoon, a used Subaru Outback with a cracked mud flap pulled into the Hale Auto and Diesel lot. Claire got out, wearing a jacket she had not been wearing when she first drove in from Denver, and walked into the bay. She said she needed a brake estimate. Daniel looked at her. He looked at the car. He looked at her again. Something moved in his expression. Barely there. The kind of thing you would miss if you were not paying close attention. He said, "Pull it into Bay 2. She pulled it into Bay 2. 6 weeks later, on a Friday in late September, the cottonwoods along the creek had gone fully gold. A steady wind came down from the Bridger Range and moved through the garage lot, pushing leaves in slow circles across the concrete. The Bennett Vance office on Main Street was 3 rooms above a tax preparation firm, 2 blocks from Wild Crumb. Claire had hired 2 people, both local, both careful. She walked to the garage from work the way some people walk to the coffee shop, not urgently, not with an appointment, just because the direction made sense. She came in through the open bay without announcing herself. Daniel was kneeling beside the Subaru's front passenger wheel, showing Eli how to read the rotor surface with his fingers. Eli had motor oil to his elbows and was grinning the way children grin when they are being trusted with something real. Claire sat down on the oil drum near the bay entrance, the same one she had sat on the first morning she came back with no clipboard. She did not say anything. When Eli straightened up to reach for a rag, she held out a bottle of cold water, and he took it without ceremony. The radio on the workbench was running a weather report. Gallatin Valley, high near 51, wind northwest at 12. The afternoon light came through the open bay door at a low angle, catching the dust on the concrete floor and the edge of Eli's hair and the side of Daniel's face as he turned to reach for a torque wrench. Daniel stood. He carried the wrench back to its spot on the pegboard. He walked past Claire on his way to the supply room at the back. He placed one hand on her shoulder as he passed. 3 seconds. Not long. Not accompanied by anything, no words, no pause, no look exchanged. He just kept walking. She did not turn to watch him go. She looked at the open bay door and the golden cottonwood at the edge of the lot. Eli had his head back under the hood. Without looking up, he said, "Dad says you can stay for dinner. He made too much chili again." From the back room, Daniel said nothing. Claire said, "Okay." They left at 5:45, the 3 of them walking from the garage down the gravel apron to the slope behind the building. Eli went first, jacket unzipped, heading for the creek. Daniel walked on the right. Claire walked on the left. Their shadows stretched long behind them over the dry grass, reaching back toward the building and the sign on its face, and the 6 acres of slope and stone and creek in memory that no one had ever been able to correctly price. Thomas Hale had taught his son to drive on this ground in 1971. Sarah Hale had laid her newborn son in this grass and watched him discover the sky. A county recorder's assistant had typed a trust document in this county in 1968 and clipped a 3x5 card to the back of it, and had the good sense to keep it safe for 56 years. And a man who had once designed bridges had chosen this instead, and had been correct, even when it cost him everything that looked like success. Neither of them had been looking, but the land had been waiting, the way good land does for the people who knew it wasn't for sale. The kitchen light came on inside the house. The door opened and closed. The land held its shape in the last of the light, empty and full at the same time, the way it always had, the way it always would.